The text itself then, Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. As you're looking at the map, here's London, right down in southeast England. York is way up here, right? And York was significant for our discussion of the Vikings. We looked at Jorvik, that old Viking settlement up in this area here. And so all of the kind of raiders and pirates coming from the North Sea, many of them established colonies up on that part of England. So London is down here. You can see again, Wales is over here, Cornwall is over here, Scotland in the north. So you can see those places on the periphery, on the fringe, where the old kind of Celtic language and culture were kind of pushed away from the center of power. And increasingly, London is going to be the driving force behind culture and language development. So standard English from this time forward will emanate out from London. And Bath is, let's see if we've got, Bath is down over here. So Bath is not too far from London, but farther than Dover, I would say. Canterbury is right in here. So the wife of Bath would have already been on a pilgrimage, right? She would have already had to start her journey traveling perhaps alone, which tells you a little bit about her spirit and her willfulness and her courage and independence. So she has now met up in the great metropolis with these fellow travelers, and they're all going to head down to Canterbury together, which is in Kent. Kent is where Charles Dickens grew up as well. Chaucer's language. So Chaucer is a fascinating person, and he's someone who's had a very successful career as a courtier and diplomat. And he consciously decides he's going to write in English. We talked about how this is during the period of the 100 Years' War with France. So creating poetry in English is an act of political resistance in many ways. And we have from the authors of the Story of English, I think, a really wonderful quote about Chaucer. He's one of those writers of genius on whom English has always depended for its important transformations. So like Shakespeare, or like Dickens, or like Virginia Woolf, Geoffrey Chaucer is one of those who's responsible for some transformative innovations in English language and literature. And really starts to move the English people, the British people, toward a national language during a time when the language of the church is still Latin. So this is 100 years before the Protestant Reformation. There's still only one church. It's the Roman Catholic Church. There is, in this area, the Great Schism occurs where there are actually two popes. There's one Catholic Church, but there's a pope in Italy, and there's a pope in France. And that perhaps starts to lay the groundwork for the Reformation and the subsequent breaks with the Roman Church, because, well, if there are two popes, how can both be infallible? And how can both be talking directly to God if they're battling with each other? So this is part of Chaucer's context. So French has replaced language. Latin is the language of legal documents in the 13th century, so the 1200s. Henry V becomes the first king to use English in his official documents by 1417. What do you know about Henry V? Shakespeare fans, people who've watched Kenneth Branagh movies. Once more into the breach, dear friends, right? How about Tom Hanks fans and Band of Brothers? It was the St. Crispin's Day speech. So that's a little bit later, right? So the monarchs are not yet using English, which tells you that what Chaucer is doing is in some ways a little on the side of the radical, right? And yet he's a court favorite. He's a powerful person. He's incredibly savvy. He's an insider. So he's an artist who has political power. You know, how interesting. So let's see if we can recognize the difference between some of the French and English words that would have characterized the language at that time and on to this day. There's an incredible number of French loanwords in 21st century English. Okay, acknowledge and confess. Which one is the old Anglo-Saxon?
Acknowledge.
Okay, how do you know? Okay, the edge, right? Everybody remembers Edgetheow, Beowulf's father. Okay, good. And the silent letters that were not silent at that time. Fit and proper.
Proper.
Okay, proper is French. Why does fit sound like an Anglo-Saxon word to you? If you've got an ear for Old English at this time.
The way it sounds.
The F and the T, that guttural of the monosyllabic words. When you looked at the Seamus Heaney poem, Digging, you were pulling out those words that just had that much more kind of visceral, grounded, full-bodied kind of sound to them. Okay, lands and tenement, you see the English and the French. Of course, the M-E-N-T ending is French. Pardon, right? And forgive, the F sound again. Peace and quiet. Think about Hamlet and quietus, right? Let's see if I can recall the line that is, make your own quietus. I'm paraphrasing that part with a bear bodkin, who would Bartle's bear to suffer, etc. Okay, rack and ruin. What do you think? Which one is English and which is French?
Rack is English.
Okay, rack sounds English. It fills up your mouth. Ruin, you have to kind of constrict your lips, right? And that French articulation. How about breaking and entering?
Entering is French.
Entering is French, entree. And breaking feels English, right? The old Anglo-Saxon. So some of the French loanwords that you'll recognize in the original manuscript for Canterbury Tales, April, March, Perced, Veine, liqueur, vertu, engendered, and fleur. But it's not flour as in the ingredient that you use to make bread, but flower as in actual, a blossom growing out of the garden. Some of the prefixes that are Latin derived, so these are morphemes, right? Prefixes and suffixes are both morphemes. The con, etc., and then the suffixes. So we talked about how that's one of those changes from the old Anglo-Saxon is the morphological endings of words change, and some actually drop off and become separate words, in the case with some prepositions. So Middle English, we've got pronunciation prior to the great vowel shift, so that point of articulation still further back in the throat. The last E is going to be pronounced for the most part, especially at the end of a line of verse. In the middle of the lines, this is where poets at the time had some flexibility, just as Shakespeare has flexibility, right? Whether he's going to, like an ED ending is going to be a contraction, or whether it's going to take a stress as its own syllable. Banished, right? You can say banished, or you can say banished in Shakespearean English. The long E is generally spelled Y, and you'll see that used also as a, for the past participle, as a prefix. So you'll see like Y dash clept, yclept, he's been called. And that's a morpheme that we no longer have in modern English. Seemly, at this point, would have had 3 syllables to it, so something like simile. No apostrophe S. And so this is one of those, is that a derivational or an inflectional morpheme, the apostrophe S? Okay, is it creating a new word? It's inflecting. It's inflecting a word with possession. So Jennifer, Jennifer's coffee. It's not a new word. It's still the noun Jennifer, but it's been inflected with the possessive. But you won't see that. So you'll see gods, Goddes, not meaning plural gods, meaning gods possessive. CH is pronounced as in church. You'll hear the R's rolled or trilled. So present tense, I love, thou lovest, he loveth, we, for ye or they, love. And we talked about how the thou is the informal register, the intimate register, and the you is the formal. There's that prefix y being used as a past participle. So past participles are like the ed or the ing or the en endings, now used as a suffix, right? Our past participles in modern English come at the end of the words. They had one that came at the beginning. Some words have different modern English meanings, so suffer meaning allow. Where have you seen this use of suffer before? In biblical text? Suffer the little children to come unto me, allow them to come to me. Concrete words are often Germanic in origin, while words for abstractions often derive from Latin via French. So when you start to do something like addiction analysis, knowing that the words that describe physical reality often are the Anglo-Saxon words from those Germanic tribes. So as a poet, if you're a poet like Seamus Heaney and you're really interested in the stuff around people, you're going to be very attracted to those old Germanic words. And Chaucer does write in iambic pentameter. The Pearl poet did not. So iambic pentameter means now that 10-syllable line does matter. But because what I was saying about the final E, whether like on the N of pain, like paina, or pain, if that word is in the middle of a line, Chaucer could do it either way. So that's where he had some flexibility to play around with the syllable count. And then the pronouns he, she, me, and we were pronounced hey, shay, may, and way. Have you heard this accent? Hey, shay, may, way.
It's like southern.
Okay, so we'll still hear pronouns pronounced that way in different regions. They was pronounced as a diphthong. What's a diphthong? Well, it's going to have, it's a vowel that has two different sounds to it. So it's a gliding vowel. So it makes two sounds. So we talked about like cow. And you can feel there are 2 points of articulation. Remember what a point of articulation is. It's what your teeth and your lips and your tongue, everything, are doing to make a sound. So a diphthong has 2 points of articulation. So you're gliding from one to the other. In modern English, the vowel sound has just 1 point of articulation. It's just A. You feel that. But if you say thy, and again, does it sound like any accent that you know? Thy. It's a diphthong. It's gliding from one point of articulation to the next. And it might sound like a regional accent to you. I, my, mine were pronounced E, me, and me. So the my and the me. So for the possessive, I'm going to go get me coffee after this. What does that sound like to you? We're going to be reading Pygmalion, right? My Fair Lady, Audrey Hepburn. So a little bit of that Cockney accent, right? So these residual traces of the Middle English accent are present not only in British English, but in American English. So more about Middle English. Take a look at some of the words there. I'm guessing you may have seen this form of since before. I think that shows up in later centuries. Quite for repay or requite. That's what I was saying with Hamlet about making a quietus. Okay, let's see how we do with this. Me think at it according to reason, and I won't do it with the accent, I'll just do the reading. You'll get the accent in a moment. To tell you all the condition of each of them, so as it seemed me, in which they were, and of what degree. And eke, what does eke mean? Did I move it too quickly? Got it right fast. Eke means what?
And or also.
Also, and eke, and what array they were in. What's array? Okay, we have condition up here. Array, this is a modern English word, right? Array could mean array like how you're organized, like a linear array. Could also mean how you're attired. And at a night, then will I first begin. So me think it accordant to reason. Does that make sense to you? So it's a good idea. I'm going to tell you the condition of each of the pilgrims, so as they seem to me. What degree, what might that mean? Extent, okay. So also their social status, their rank. We're going to hear about these different characters. Here's the knight. And though that he were worthy, he was wise, and of his port, his carriage, as meek as is a maid. He never yet no villainy nor said in all his life unto no manner wight. He was a very parfait, gentle knight. What does parfait sound like to you? Perfect, good. What kind of accent? Parfait. Does it sound almost Irish or Scottish to you a little bit if you say it? Okay. Looks French. Gentil, right? Alouette, gentil, alouette. What does gentil mean? Nice, right? Yeah, nice little bird, I'm going to pluck your feathers. Horrible song. So we can read about the knight. We can understand this. You'll notice in the Middle English, you can have double negatives. And so this is going to be interesting. Those of you who want to write about standardization and prescriptive attitudes toward language, right? And when do things change? My kids, when they were little, would often use double negatives as an intensifier, as I would say, a rhetorically effective choice. So I don't want no vegetables, right? If you are a proper kind of prescriptive grammarian, you say, well, that means you do want some vegetables. I'm so glad to hear that. Here, have some broccoli. But of course, I understood what my children meant. I don't want no vegetables means I really don't want any vegetables. And Middle English writers and speakers do the same thing. So not only will you see double negatives, you'll sometimes see triple and quadruple negatives to really, really intensify what the writer is saying. So this knight, was he ever guilty of villainy, of anything improper? No, never. A knight there was, and that a worthy man, that from the time that he first began to ride out, he loved chivalry, truth and honor, freedom and courtesy. Full worthy was he in his lord's war, and thereunto had he ridden no man far, as well in Christendom as heatheness, and ever honored for his worthiness. So he's ridden far throughout the Christian lands, but also in heathen territory, so invoking things like perhaps the Crusades. So some stylistic devices that are going to be important in the Canterbury Tales. Couplets. What's a couplet?
Last two rhyming.
Okay, couple of rhyming lines. Often in Shakespeare we'll see them at the end of a speech or at the end of a sonnet. Iambic pentameter, that's that shall I compare thee to a summer's day. So 10 syllables in a line alternating unstressed and stressed. Lidites, we had that from Beowulf. What's lidites? Understatement, so the counterpart to the figure of speech hyperbole. And he was not right fat. I undertake, a description of the clerk, so an understatement of his size. We'll notice virtuous and vicious characters. Vicious relating to vice. So this is a word that's changed some over time. Now, vicious tends to be used specifically to describe aggression, like you can say, a vicious pit bull or something like that. But vicious could relate to any kind of vice, any kind of sin. So a woman could be described as vicious if she were supposed to be unfaithful to her husband. So the virtuous characters are going to include people like the knight and the parson. The vicious characters, we've got the friar who is self-indulgent, the franklin, the summoner, and the pardoner. And these are religious people. A summoner and a pardoner, do you know what those are? Okay, so a summoner is someone who is almost like someone who, well, in court cases today, if you are summoned to a trial, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You've been served, right? You're obligated to appear. So the summoner had the same job back in the 12th and 13th centuries, but on the business of the church. And there were lots of accusations of summoners taking advantage of their power, saying, oh, what, you don't want to go face this accusation against you? Okay, it'll cost you, and we can all make this go away, right? Pardoners were similarly liable to bribes. Pardoners were, they had dispensations from the Pope, and sometimes they were counterfeit that people could purchase to be pardoned for their sins. So you've done this thing, you're feeling guilty about it, you want to get out of some years in purgatory. Here, I will sell you a pardon for what you have done. And as I said, maybe it was a pardon that had been counterfeit or was certainly probably overpriced. We're going to look at different representations of masculinity and femininity, both the real and the ideal. And I want you watching for who seems to fall into kind of the middle area between those poles, and how our notions of the ideal complicate it in something like the knight's tale, the knight who comes across as worthy almost to a fault, where he almost seems a little bit like a flat character because of his excessive one-dimensional worthiness. And this is a description of the summoner as hoot he was and lecherous, hot, right? Desirous, lusty in the sense of lusting after the flesh. And lecherous as a spar, with scaled brows, black and piled beard, of his visage. What's visage? Face, right. You remember Nathaniel Hawthorne, the minister's black veil is covered, his visage is covered with a veil. Of his visage, children were afeared. So he looks like the devil in his appearance. And then here's the wife of Bath. Bold was her face, and fair, and reed of hue. Red, right? She's lusty in the sense of full of life. She was a worthy woman all her life. Husbands at church doors she had 5, without an other company in youth, and there was maybe some on the side, but thereof never not to speak as newth. So you that can all kind of go under the bridge. So she's a worthy woman, and the wife of Bath is considered one of the greatest creations in English literature. She's a marvelous, marvelous character. She kind of steals the show in a collection of tales where you have lots of kind of bright stars and really interesting people. And then there's the nun. So she's the counterpart in terms of feminine identity to the wife of Bath. There was also a nun, a prioress, so a powerful nun, right? She's leading a priory. That of her smiling was full simple and coy. Her greatest oath, so the worst, like bad word she would say, was, but by Saint Eloi. And she was clept Madame Eglantine. Full well she sung the service divine, a tuned in her nose full simile, and French she spake full fair and fetisly. So she sings in her nose, right? She's a proper lady, but she comes across as kind of proud and excessively dainty and a little bit full of herself. And she tells a really interesting tale. So not only the prologue for the full Canterbury Tales, but also the individual prologues for the tales, and the tales themselves serve as devices of characterization.